everybody, it's Dr. Luce, and we are just continuing on with exercise 4-6 here. And I'm going to try to go through these fairly quickly so that if people are having problems, they don't have to watch a whole large video. And I'm going to go ahead and parcel these up, so I'm going to try to do 3 videos to finish this off. So quickly, we're looking here at loops and arrays, and we're trying to create our own array with a loop that runs over it. And so one thing to remember is sort of this difference between what's in the code block versus what the array is saying. And I think for me, that's one of the more confusing things. Maybe that might be something that's confusing you, is the separate ways these two structures interact. And honestly, the only way to figure it out is to practice, practice, practice. So let's just look at what we're supposed to be doing here. We want to create an array called names and fill it with 5 names. So that's pretty easy. Oops, there we go. Start out with var. We're going to call our variable names, and we're going to make it equal to something that is an array, and we need 5 names. So I'm just going to use names that were in the chat. And so going backwards, I see Shell, like Romper Room here, and Bobby, and Richard, and Becca, and Claire. Okay, so there is our array with 5 names in it. First task down. Now we want to write a for loop that prints, I know someone called, right? So that's my goal. And so I know I'm going to need this code eventually, right? I know someone called. And I want a space there, and I want it to be followed by the part of this array that I want and the position. So I can understand that. So I'm just typing this code out ahead of time for myself because I know I'm going to use it, and that way I can think about these things sort of one chunk at a time, if that makes sense. Oops, I need not those braces. Hard braces, there we go, and I. And then one thing I forgot here is that we of course need the parentheses around our console log. I didn't put those up right away. But okay, so I'm pretty confident that that's what I'm going to be printing out, and this is sort of the bit of code that I need for it to tell me or to print out for me, I know someone called, and then to go through each one of these names. So I know that that's sort of what I want to be doing. That's basically the code block that I'm going to have in my for loop. But now I have to do that part where I tell the computer how to go to this array and pick out each one of these names. And so that's the for loop part of it, right? So we've got our for loop, and then we have to declare sort of everything in the parentheses, but the one little bit that I'm missing here to make that console log part make sense is the curly braces, because remember that's the code block that we're going to be repeating. And so I'm just putting that in, and again it's sort of more efficient to do this in the order that the computer wants it done in, but I'm trying to do it in a different order just as an alternative, because it's a different, maybe your brain thinks differently than the linearity of the code. So that's the code block, and I know that that's the bit I'm going to be running based on how my for loop conditionals work, right? So the first part of my for loop is to have a starting number for my I. And so what this conditional is running, this loop is running over this array. There are 5 spots in this array, and I want it to move through those 5 spots. So I want my loop to start with 0. Remember that part. And then I want it to have a conditional. And so what I want it to be evaluating is whether or not I is less than the length of my array. And I want this function to work whether the length of the array is 1,000 or 2. So I want to be able to change the array and still have this code work. So I don't want to put in a number here. I want to put in the name of the array, which is names, dot length. Right? So no matter how many variables I put in there, this code is still going to work. I want it to be repeatable, yeah? And then As long as I is less than the total length, I want this thing to keep going, keep executing my code because I want every name printed out. But I want it to increment one slot at a time in the array. So to do that, I do I plus plus, right? So for me, it's more clear to think of it that way. And that should then work for our code. And there we go, it did. And it goes on through. And just to show you why it is that you think of it in that way, it says to only have 5, but let's go ahead and put a couple more just to show why it is you write the code that way. Oh, we had Kaya on line 2, so I put myself in there and Kaya. And now if we run it again, we'll probably get an error because it only wanted 5 names for the program, but the code should still run fine. Yeah, it did. But see here, there aren't 5 names on the array, right? So I just have to delete these last 2, but you can see that the code actually worked fine in both cases. Yeah? Okay, great. And I am going to end this video and I'll do the next 2 exercises after.